It's time to step out now into cosmos, into mythos, into psyche.
Stumbling backwards in the dark, digging up rituals from the past, orbiting satellites that pass, sending us signals into the night. If I told you what you don't know, could you work it out? We are history, dying to be free, and I don't know what to hope for as you take my hand. We are mystery, about to be released.
We are history, dying to be free. That was Jose Gonzalez with 07, kind of tuning us up for what's about to happen in this third installment of the Boneyard series. So far we've covered Saturn and Pluto, and after this show the only one that remains is Jupiter. I did do the class on Jupiter, I just haven't done the podcast yet, so that'll be coming hopefully by the end of this month. Fingers crossed on that one. And so this show, a show for Ketu, Wyrd Tales. I'm not quite sure that the ghost is completely clear yet, even though Ketu is about to move, with Rahu of course, into the new respective signs of Gemini and Sag. But we're not there yet. Still in Capricorn, that dragon tail is the south node of the moon, that cauldron of old and weird stories. Really the sigil on the back of a cobra's head. If you don't believe me, Google it. Google back of a cobra's head and you'll see the symbol for the south node of the moon. To the Western minded, it's past lives, to be simple. To the Eastern or Vedic minded, it relates to the ancestors and the spirit world and many other interesting themes. For myself, having studied both for over 12 years, it's somewhere in between. Depends on the cultural filter, depends on, well, essentially our stories. I think that the actual moon and the nodes of the moon very much are the storehouses of our stories. And so there's so much that we can glean from dealing with these facets of the moon. And if you, by the end of listening to this podcast, if you want more, I have done other podcasts on it, including eclipse shows. And there's also one on Chris Brennan's show, the Astrology podcast, called, I think he entitled it The Accidental Nodal Conversation or something along those lines, where we set out to answer a bunch of listeners' questions. And the first question was about the nodes of the moon. And it took us like 2.5 hours to hash that question out. And so it was perfect. We just talked about the nodes the whole time, so you can listen to that if you're also a fan of Chris's show. As I record this, really a lot of the process of this was when the moon was moving over my own south node and then also drifting past Ketu and Capricorn. So in this very moment, the moon just moved into Aquarius, and so is no longer with the Boneyard. And if that term is new to you, that's me referencing Pluto, Saturn, Jupiter, now Mars, some of the goddess asteroids coming and going, just that whole communion of destruction and construction that is occurring in Capricorn. And of course the south node is a very big part of this. And so just to tune into the moment, that's kind of where I've been. I've been in process, I think, more than just the last couple of days of getting my mind around how I want to present these ideas. But it really took that retreat that I was on in Peru to get most clear about it. And partly of what happened there was the retreat began with the moon heading towards the boneyard. It crossed my own south node, which is at 28 degrees Sagittarius. In fact, that happened on the galactic center with our last ceremony that we did with my favorite medicine in the entire world called Wachuma, which actually looks a lot like an erect dragon's tail, to be honest. Incredible heart medicine, and it's a part of the dragon's body that Ketu actually possesses, unlike Rahu, who's all head. Ketu has got a heart, has got a stomach, so we could say. And the word Wachuma literally means without a head. So Ketu without the dragon's head, Wachuma, this beautiful cactus without a head. Wach means remove, and Uma means head. So metaphorically, it's a medicine that really does kind of dissolve the idea of the ego, or we could even say the moon a little bit too. So our stories, these nodes, kind of they go away a little. Like the pull from the past to the future, if you want to see it like that, are removed in the sense that you're bringing it into the present moment, and in that present moment we always find something like the heart, right? And it was such a powerful way to kind of conclude the retreat, because I knew this about the medicine. I knew it would be a great thing after the whole group had come together, and that the moon was getting very close to the south node, and that Wachuma means this, that it was just going to be the perfect thing to do, and it was. And without boring you with all the personal details that happened in it, like the great realization that I had was around nodal cycles, yes, but also in really a Jupiter cycle, I guess, because it was 12 years ago that I was in the Amazon. I had went down there in 2008, right when Pluto had moved into Capricorn, so that has a little bit to play into the story, in pursuit of learning a lot about plants down there. I was in Chinese medicine school at the time, and I wanted to combine the two of them together. That was my intention. I was very interested as well in ethnobotany, and that's where I was before astrology. And it didn't last. There was deep lessons that pushed me back to the mainland, and coming home, what immediately happened was astrology, Qigong and astrology. And it began this whole Jupiter cycle that I've been on with astrology and also the Qigong. And so it was really beautiful to see that tail finding the mouth of the dragon through, yes, a Jupiter cycle, but also there's themes as well when looked at with the right eyes in my own chart. And so this is kind of what I'm processing at the moment, like this new plants and planets integration. I've kind of been in a lull. Maybe you've noticed the absence. I think it's just because I'm still integrating, not quite done pulling off the slimy skins of my pupation. So ideally, I think I'd want to take a year off, live in a treehouse in the Amazon, diet some plants, read some books, write the great Amazonian novel. But it's not where I'm at. It's definitely not where I'm at. I actually moved into my Saturn North Node period while on that retreat. And so there's a new story that I have been gifted and I'm envisioning. But the wings just aren't strong enough yet for flight. And so I still think I'm pupating, which allows me to do a show like this with Ketu and talk about the old Wyrd stories, because I really have been tuning my ear the best that I can to the ancestors. And it is something that we'll talk about in this show. Some of Mercury's riddles, like with Mercury being close, I am recording this with him retrograde in Pisces. They kind of have me scratching my chin, but also there's just so much information coming through that I think is going to be helpful, both for your listening of this show and also moving forward. There'll be more Plants and Planets episodes. I plan on having Seja on the show here very soon, if you're familiar with him from old shows, and there'll be more of it. There will indeed be more of it. And so, if at any point you have enjoyed in listening to these podcasts, watching this metamorphosis take place over the years of my little hermetic exploration, if you learn, if you laugh, if you shake your head from time to time, consider heading over to Patreon. And there's a lot of amazing things, and it just takes a pause sometimes to realize that if you do listen to all these shows, like if you go over there and just at the dollar level, there's 40 other podcasts that you've never heard before, including this updated video I just did called Getting Started with Crypto. And this is a big deal. Like, I'm sure everyone has heard of Bitcoin. If you haven't, where have you been? But it is a very informative video after 3 years of me learning everything that I can really learn about this in my free time that I have. Like, it's an updated version of how to get involved, what it is, why it's not exactly just an investment. It's a way of transitioning your value and your way of spending and living to the blockchain, and taking control of all of this and not giving it to the bank. And so I'm incentivizing that, not just by becoming a patron and supporting the podcast, but also for all of my readings and classes, you get automatically 50% off if you pay in crypto. And that could be stable coins, Bitcoin, Ethereum. If you want to pay for a reading or any of my classes, you automatically get 50% off. And so that's a wonderful thing. And there is the latest Plants and Planets podcast that I did when I was in Peru that you can listen to on there. That's the latest one. And those are all there for you at patreon.com/Adam Summer. And then many amazing things as going up. You can even get certified as a professional astrologer at as low as the $50 level. And so there's so much there. Head on over, read about the different pledge tiers. I thank you ahead of time. And if you don't have $1, I guess I understand. There's a free way of supporting the podcast. If you've listened to more than one, all you need to do is scroll down in your podcast app and give it some stars. And if you give it a review, maybe even share one of your weird stories that come up, a synchronicity perhaps, by listening to this show or another one, share that on the podcast, send me a screenshot, and I'll link you to any class of your choosing that's on my website, which is holstoheavens.com. So those are two really easy, really beneficial ways that you can support the production of future podcasts. So now we inquire about the ancestral twine that's wrapped around the dragon's tail to find stories that I think we're more than familiar with. They're comfort zones threaded in our DNA, talents that we overlook, sometimes overuse, patterns which turn our waters brackish from time to time. Yet, when churned properly and sang to in a beautiful way, I think that we get to ladle out magical libation from Ketu. We have seen this all before, and slowly it fades. But just as slowly, it all returns. Rahu and Ketu are very amazing teachers on the nature of time in our stories.
Give it time and we wonder why. Do what we can, laugh and we cry, and we sleep in your dust because we've seen this all before. Culture fades with tears and grace, leaving us stunned, hollow with shame. We have seen this all before. Many tribes of a modern kind, doing brand new work, same spirit by side, joining hearts and hands in ancestral twine, ancestral twine. Many tribes of a modern kind, doing brand new work, same spirit by side, joining hearts and hands in ancestral twine, ancestral twine. Slowly it fades, and slowly we fade. And slowly you fade. And slowly you fade. Imana yo 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 yo. 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 Imana yo 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 yo.
So why is Ketu so important? This ancestral twine. By the way, that was Xavier Rudd, who has Ketu at 2 degrees of Aries, the warrior spirit. In fact, he talks about how much of his music is his nan, his grandma, that is coming through, that it's her songs that's coming through his voice. I love that. It would be really interesting to see the synastry between the two of them, especially to that south node at 2 degrees Aries. You see such things when stories like that emerge. So anyways, currently, the south node of the moon is at 5 degrees of Capricorn. Mars in Capricorn now as well, headed towards it. And Ketu is so important to understand because wherever it's moving in the sky, right, there's 2 main themes we can say that are occurring. Like there's a release, that is, there is loss that is occurring in that area of our lives, but there's also something that's really curious that I've been seeing more so this time around in Capricorn than ever before, and that is rememberings. We could even say ancestral recollections. And for a lot of 2019, Saturn was traveling along with Ketu. And it was when the two of them were together, I started seeing this in almost every reading, every conversation that I was getting into. People were kind of remembering something, that whether it was past life regression or getting in touch with their ancestry or having these interesting dreams where spirits were coming through. But there was something coming through the boneyard. It was part of my naming of this lineup in Capricorn, was a lot of these experiences that just kept occurring. And also it's true for myself. And if you're a tarot fan, we could say that like this Ketu in Capricorn and its relation to the rest of them, Pluto, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars. Now, it's a dash of the Tower, maybe a drop of the Moon, sprinkle of the Devil in there, I reckon. And so there's a lot of this releasing, and it is the tail of the dragon. It's a place where what we have eaten, what we have digested is falling through, right? And we're being guided, I think, in a different way, not by our head, but by our heart in that particular area of our lives. There's other ways of seeing this that we'll talk about in the show. But this loss component, I think, is important to sit with for just a moment, because especially around eclipses, that's when the sun and the moon are either doing new or full moons in close proximity to Rahu Ketu. There always seems to be a spike in souls transitioning. And I'm still a little unsure of how I feel about this, whether it's auspicious or not, because it's a dragon hole, but the timing is impeccable. And every time the eclipses come around, there just seems to be this spike of people choosing to leave body. And I don't think Kobe this time around did. I think it was a little bit after. But there was a lot of news and also just gathering stories. As you do as an astrologer, as you do as a student of astrology, you start to see that there's spikes with certain transits, right? And so there's that theme in like the Oz fires, the Pisac flooding. There's been total floods here in the UK. And why? What is the point of, say, just Ketu being in Capricorn causing this? Well, it's not just Ketu in Capricorn, it's also Pluto, who is purifying. It's also Saturn, which is the reckoning of time. It's Jupiter, which is opportunity to move on in some sense. And now Mars, like giving us the fortitude to actually deal with these cards that we're dealt with. And so for all of those that, say, are becoming ancestors, there's something else that's happening in us that are sticking around, of learning to tune our ears best to the ancestors. There's a great remembering that I think is happening. And of course, in the process, like if you're listening to this and you have been directly affected from losing someone close to you, or whether it's, through a passing or just, a story, a person that you had to just move on from, a group of people, a place that you had to move on from, because this is where Ketu is playing out the story. There's this idea that comes from Martin Prechtel that I think is super important, and it's about grief. And he says that grief expressed out loud for someone we have lost, or a country or a home we have lost, is in itself the greatest praise we could ever give them. Grief is praise, because it is the natural way love honors what it misses. It is the natural way love honors what it misses. And so I'm sure there are a few of you listening that this really hit at home. And if you want to go deeper with Martin's work, there's a great book that's all about this whole idea, grief and praise, called The Smell of Rain on Dust. I highly recommend it. It's very small. It's not even big enough to hold a door open, but it's a powerful little book. And I think it's a great one for these times that we're in. And in fact, Martin, I don't know his exact birth info, but his nodes are flipped from Xavier Rudd's. Xavier's got that Aries South node, and Martin has a Libra South node. Both polarities square the one that we're interested in this podcast, which is Capricorn Cancer, right? And so anyways, a bit on the East and West again, this whole riddle. I mean, it's such a paradox that it creates, for some astrologers, especially some traditional ones, that they don't even use the nodes of the moon. Many astrologers in the West as well only put Rahu in the chart, the North node, and omit the South node. To me, I think this is a crime. This is absolutely blasphemous. This is not okay. You need to include both of them because, well, that's what makes the dragon whole, but it's also what allows us to understand the whole story. And one of the more interesting ideas that comes from the Vedic perspective is that siddhis, that is, magical powers, can be seen around the South Node story. I like this because it almost weaves into the concept of South Node as past lives. And so a lot of the focus, like say with evolutionary astrology, is that the South Node story with Pluto is like a lot of trauma that we carry. It's the old story that we're trying to get out of. I would contend that by saying, well, say we'll just choose 12. Like it's an amalgam of 12 different incarnations, like a Cloud Atlas type story. And by God, we better be good at a few things after 12 lifetimes, right? And so whatever we've been working on, right? Like there's a siddhi, there's something that we're incredibly good at. And I think that when the South Node is activated, say by a big transit, like I'm about to go through my nodal return. A lot of people born in the early 80s are going through their nodal returns right now. Like there's these rememberings that occur of like, oh, like this is my inheritance. This is something that I carry with me. This is the medicine. And I'll share a couple tales in the course of this show that relate to that for myself, because whenever there's something big that happens to my South Node, it's like kind of reaching my hand into that cauldron that looks like the symbol for the South Node and then pulling something back, remembering it, reclaiming it, and through that, it helps us to move toward Rahu or the North Node. It gives us the courage because we have a tool, we have a power that we've earned through hard work. And we could even say lifetimes if we subscribe to that. But the past, it has many shadows as well. I think it's why Rahu and Ketu are also considered shadow planets. That's also because of eclipses, but there is a shadowy nature to both Ketu and Rahu, and I think it has so much to do as well with their relationship to time. All great spiritual traditions or practices put great importance on the present moment. Whereas if we're talking about the past with South Node, if we're talking about the future with the North Node, we're not fully in the present moment. And so when we subscribe to a past life, like you're the reincarnation of a sun god from the Incan Empire or something like this, like that messes with your consciousness in the present moment, flares up the ego a little bit. In the same way, if you're convinced that you're going to be a billionaire in the future and you're going to be on Oprah, that too messes with the present moment a little bit. And so it's this dynamic that we all experience between our relationship to the past and the future. And hence Rahu and Ketu are called shadow planets. I think that they do pull us in these weird directions, whereas Ketu, through the Vedic mind, is this ancestral component. It connects us to the other world. It's without the head. We just trust the feeling that's coming through. And then Rahu is this insatiable part of ourselves, so hungry for material gain and effect in the third dimension that it too is, they're very hard to wrangle, our relationship to the two of them. And so it's somewhere in between that I think we're always trying to find, and in a way coaxing the head of the dragon, Rahu, to the tail to keep it satiated for eternity. In a way, we transcend our stories then. There's also this idea that, like, we're all ghosts. We all carry inside us the people that came before us. I like this. Like we all carry these stories, whether it's genetic, if you see it like that, if you're more scientifically minded, or if it's spiritual, whatever this inheritance is, like we're a round table of ghosts and memory. And we need to trust our ancestors. Without them, we wouldn't be here. We would be starved for context with the sky and with the ground if it wasn't for their insights. We need to trust that they didn't just build Stonehenge to have a yearly party, but to align to the cosmos, to connect sky to ground. We need to trust that the pyramids weren't impossibly built simply to honor a pharaoh, but for reasons much weirder, much more in line with bringing sky to ground. We must trust that our ancestors' knowledge of medicinal plants was everything but recreational. They knew that the plants were allied healers, those who capture the light, who help us connect to nature in the spirit world, straight from the ground into the infinite sky. We must trust that they knew something about fate we are just now recovering. Why else would the old wizards value astrological timing techniques as highly as they did? Techniques like the dasas, zodiacal releasing, annual perfections. They were all used and are used to understand our fate in the weird webs woven throughout our lives. And like any tool, it could be used for the light or the dark arts. But fate, were they all wrong? Were they? Come on. No different from the Fermi's paradox, or the Fermi paradox, which shows that beyond likely there's a probability of other life existing in the universe. I think the same is true with the perennial teachings of our ancestors. Their connection to plants and planets should not be ignored. We need to trust the shoulders that we stand on, the ones that knew long winters and skies without light pollution. They knew something we have forgotten, yet hopefully are remembering. We must also trust in their pantheons. Monotheism is both new and a bit outdated. It's time to remember that we are being dreamt by something much weirder than we can even suppose. To think we know everything is about as useful as trying to fit the ocean in your favorite cup. We're amnesiacs. It's time to remember. The plants and the planets are two of our best tools we have to remember the polytheistic, animistic nature of reality. And so I say, my friends, we must trust our ancestors. They have never been more eager to help. So we tune in with the plants and the planets to see the truth of sky and ground revealed. It's all above, it's all below. And this has so much to do with Ketu, our connection in the headless way to the ancestral pool that is always there just shoo, just a little shoo to the side, just a little shoo, a question away from, what's trying to get through there? What is that?
Slowly you fade. Slowly you fade. Slowly you Give it time and we wonder why. Do what we can, laugh and we cry, and we sleep in your dust because we've seen this all before.
Xavier Rudd once again. That's the song Spirit Bird from the album called Spirit Bird. We've seen this all before. So appropriate. So I want to reflect a little bit on Ketu's time in Capricorn, Rahu, and Cancer as well. So by the way, I use mean nodes versus true. So the nodes have been in Capricorn Cancer since November 16th of 2018. And they will be there until June 4th when they move on into Gemini Sag. This is always a big deal because it's in or around these transitions when the eclipses will change. So the Cancer and Capricorn eclipses that have been happening will slowly fade into Gemini Sag eclipses. And, well, the whole story that we're about to explore, like this polarity of the tail and the head of the dragon, it takes a major transition. And if you use whole sign, it is activating 2 new houses in your chart. And there's this concept that I'm going to weave through, and I don't want all of you to get confused by this. In the class that I'm going to be teaching on Sunday on Ketu, we'll go deeper into it, but it's simply this. Wherever Rahu is transiting, so Cancer at the moment, there's a lot of novelty that is a new experience. The dragon is hungry, and so it's just gobbling up all of this fresh material. And then around 9+ years later, when Ketu comes around, all the results of what was experienced, what was eaten up by Rahu, comes to fruition in a very weird way. That's with a Y. And so with the South Node in Capricorn right now, we look all the way back to July of 2009. That's when Rahu was in Capricorn. And to use an example of how this works, so in the summer of 2009 was the first wind of this podcast. I had started it in April. It was called Exploring Astrology, and I was stepping towards my own North Node in Gemini in the 10th house. But it was that Rahu in Capricorn in my 5th house, and there was an insatiable creative energy in me. Like, I first started 3 different podcasts just to see which one would work. There was an astrology one, there was a Chinese medicine one, and there was one on music. And the astrology one won because people were listening to it. And I was like, okay, I'll just put them all together. And by this point, 12 years later, Plants and Planets, always using some music. That's how it works. You gotta blend all the stories together in a Vitamix. And so the tail comes around now. And, well, actually, it moved into Capricorn in the fall of 2018, and it was right around November 16th. Oh, it probably was like the day I could look at the timestamps that I had returned from Crete, the storytelling workshop, and I rebranded the show. So it was Exploring Astrology from 2009 to the fall of 2018. And then when Ketu came around, I was like, yeah, I'm like, the story has to change. Like, it's gotten me this far. But now it's Holes to Heavens, like fully owning the name of the website, but also allowing entry to all these other themes that I'm interested in. Still at the hub of the wheel is astrology, but so much else. And I think too, it was like just Rahu and Ketu as shadow planets, like they are keeping a very tight, immutable ledger on all of our actions and all of what we are after. And so Rahu, it's a hungry part of us, right? And so like whatever the spirit was of me in the beginning, and I think we all can relate to that, it's like starting something out. We're really driven. We want to be heard. We want it to be successful. And so all of that energy then 9 years later shows up, and like I wanted to take a break. I wanted to change. I just don't know how I got to that place. And, you know, the dragon aims true in a lot of ways. And so I went through a huge like that was really the beginning of the Wyrd road was then. And with the eclipses that then started, like I think the first of them that happened around the nodes in Capricorn Cancer was on, January 9th, 2019. Yeah, and that was technically the beginning of the Wyrd road because that's when I had left Boulder. I was off on my way to Maui to run a retreat about the nodes of the moon. And it was so much about releasing these old stories with Boulder. Like a lot of my identity, a lot of my community, a lot of me is tied up in that place. And so like putting all of my stuff in storage and leaving Boulder was with that eclipse on January 9th. And the eclipses are very accentuated parts of the time that the nodes spend in the signs. Like they're the highlights, they're the plot twists, they're the leaps of great themes within the story, we could say. And with a simple search, I really recommend doing this with your biography, is just running a search for all of the ingresses of the nodes. So in the class on Sunday, I'll have that in the PDF for everyone to look at for the last 100 years, but you can do it with Solar Fire. And if you do have Solar Fire, if you don't have Solar Fire, just use promo code SOMA, quick plug. You get 15% off. But a quick search will show you all of the signs and the ingresses. And so, for example, looking back, the last time that the South Node was in Capricorn was in April of 2000. April 5th, if you use mean nodes, of 2000. And I swear to you, that was the day. It was either the 4th or the 5th that I lost my best friend. He just suddenly died. It was the first week of April, like right around that point. And it's insane. Like, okay, wait. Like, what does that have to do with Ian? What does that have to do with my fifth house? Like, what does this all mean, right? And that's where you can go in studying your life, going backwards with the nodes and start to like ask these important questions. And then like the themes come up. It's like, oh my God, Ian was like the shining example of stoicism, of togetherness, of a very disciplined musician. God, he was a disciplined person in general. And why did the spirit have to leave so young and without warning like that? It's like, I was the bad one. Our crew were the bad ones. We were the ones throwing the parties, right? And he was the one that would just show up and have to leave early because he was running a marathon in the morning. But like themes like this, and it's very Capricorn, right? And like my fifth house, and like you start to learn these lessons, and you can do the same thing by looking back in time. What was being released, what was being learned, say the last time Rahu was in Capricorn, eating up all these new experiences, like I said, in July of 2009. And so then you connect the dots between when Rahu was in a sign or the same degree, and then when Ketu comes around, and then you see this very interesting shape to your stories. The Ouroboros, perhaps, it appears. And so it's this 9+ year thing that occurs, and it's mind-blowing. Like it really will change your relationship, I think, to the nodes when you start to find the stories in your own life. And then, of course, using eclipses, like January 9th, 2019, there was one at 15 degrees of Capricorn. Then July of last summer, there was one at 24 degrees of Capricorn. These were all south node eclipses. And what you would expect is they were these twists in the story. They were very eventful in that given area of your life. And for myself, it was releasing so much from my relationship to the old version of me and what I'm doing with this work here, with the podcast and everything else, but also with place and just... It was why I went off on the Wyrd road, if you've been with me for over a year listening to these shows. And what it did is when you release with Ketu, then it makes room for the novelty to come in. So that's where the Cancer North Node enters. And then voila, right? I had no idea when I set off and pointed my toes towards the Wyrd road that I would end up in England, that I would fall in love with a lady with a Cancer moon, and it would fit perfectly to the story. But we only get to experience things like that if we're brave. And the two acts of bravery when working with the nodes of the moon are, in the Ketu sense, actually releasing the stories, or revisiting the past and then doing it in a loving way, fondly taking medicine from some of our victory tales, but also releasing the resentment and learning how to forgive takes bravery. And then bravery with Rahu as well, of actually facing the dragon, because we're so fascinated by Rahu, but we're so petrified as well by what it represents. And so we need to have incredible courage to deal with a dragon at all. Right? And that, to me, is what we're dealing with when we're talking about the nodes of the moon, is our dynamic relationship to a dragon that's within all of us, that perhaps protects our inner child, but it also is the great symbol of power and of chaos. Chaos holds the greatest amount of power in the universe because we are always battling it. We are always trying to create order amongst chaos. That is basically the human struggle. That's the struggle of life, is trying to create a semblance of order. And it's like, if we don't do the chores, if we don't clean, if we don't maintain the body, if we don't eat, if we don't shave, if we don't take care of ourselves, entropy takes over, chaos wins. And in a way, it's this constant dance with the dragon that we're dealing with. So we cannot ever just whistle past the boneyard or whistle past the dragon. We need to stop, and we need to contemplate these old stories until they become weird. That's with a Y. That's the idea. Because we carry so much without even knowing it. And my God, the way we tell our stories, again, like when we look back, we have to do so in a way that doesn't wrong people in the narration, that we are mindful of the light that we paint of ourselves and also the characters that are within the story. We need to be diligent very careful with our chosen words. And so here's an idea as well, and this is one that actually shows up in that book I referenced of Martin Prechtel's, that what if in the deep marrows of time, in the kind of threaded in the ancestral twine, we are inheriting stories that aren't even ours, but they are our responsibility. So in a way, we're being dreamt by our ancestors, and especially this concept of the ones that weren't grieved properly, that they linger on in the line, and then they just, their karma, their habituations play out through us. It's a very strange idea that Martin talks about, but I think having observed it in very odd ways in my own family, probably even in myself, that there's something to this. And I think that the ones that have been ungrieved along the way, whether because they were forgotten or they died on the battlefield and they were ever properly released, right, because they were never found, their ship never made it across the Milky Way waters to the other side. Or there wasn't enough praise to get them there as wind in their sails. Perhaps there was too much drinking spirits versus offering spirits in the lifetime, remembering that Ketu is the cup that connects us to the spiritual realm. We could fill it with spirits, or we could fill it with something much more exalted. So what will you fill your cup with to sit and work out these weird tales? You know, it's a good thing to think about, like these odd ideas. And so we got to keep releasing. Keep the water warm enough in there with our fond tellings of the old tales, being able to echolocate it with using the chart, knowing that it's in the final degrees of Capricorn, moving into Sag. There's deep medicine in there for scrying insights, I think. And if we keep stirring it, then it never gets stagnant. Nothing too dangerous can grow in there, because every time we take a memory, like a book off a shelf, and we read it and kind of allow it to rework itself in our mind, like we're really changing our story. Like our relationship to the past and also our relationship to the future. It's this very interesting authoring that takes place, because by God, we are the storyteller. We are the storyteller of our lives, and if we don't know how to edit the story, everything we do is a story. Everything that you think you are is a story. And we always have to question the plot and the characters in it. We're always editing the story, and I think that's where the dragon is so helpful, because it shows us where there's gold, where there's treasure. But we have to be brave, of course, and track these cycles, 18 plus years in the nodal oppositions, the nodal returns, the eclipses. There's just so much in there for us. And so never ignore Ketu. Never ignore the nodes or eclipses. They are absolutely perpetually wrapped in the cycles of time. And I think that they're always working on our deeply ingrained conditioning. It relates to the idea that we are a work in progress. We're a story that is being edited and edited over again. We are a work in progress. And I don't know if it ever ends until we completely transcend the stories altogether.
To creation, spirits of the ancient. Is it receiving slowly color for vision, respect for revisions of your stories told? Receiving slowly color for vision, respect for revision of your stories told. Intense exchange, humbled by your medicine, humbled by your power and the things I saw. Intense exchange, humbled by your medicine, humbled by your power and the things I saw. Rise up to creation, spirits of the ancient. Rise up to creation, spirits of the ancient.
Zave again with a song from Nana, which is his reggae album. Incredible. I think that everything that Zave does is great. It's just so tapped in, and it's very much earth music, medicine music, ancestral music as well. If it is his Nan that's coming through, well, then it would make sense. So what I thought we'd do now is take a peek at what to expect from the nodes moving into Gemini and Sag. So the north node, Rahu, will be in Gemini starting in June, and the south node, Ketu, will be in Sag. The last time that they were there, but flipped, was in 2011, 2012. And what's fascinating about that is, well, for me or anyone else with the nodes in Gemini Sag, is that, well, we were either experiencing a nodal opposition or a nodal return, depending on our age and when we were born around then. And so what occurs, what the main difference is that when it's a nodal opposition, Rahu finds Ketu, the tail, and it's a powerful moment when there's kind of, that's a good way of saying it. I mean, the image is the dragon's head into the tail, but it's kind of like where the novelty is coming in is a new or fresh angle into the old, whereas the nodal return is kind of like we're opening up a new telling of our story. Like the first 18 plus years of our lives are the first telling, and the second 18 plus years, the second telling, etc. These volumes of our relationship to the dragon. But the themes, even the characters, are similar in each version. And if you study that deeply by looking at eclipses and transits with the nodes, you'll start to see it. Like whether it's archetypal semblance between the characters, the actual characters, the themes, like they're all there. It's unbelievable how that works. And so a quick story that I have around that is that during my nodal return, when I was, a senior in high school, essentially when that was happening, is when I got my first guitar and I started learning music. And my first inspirations were Dylan and Jack Johnson and Ben Harper, Xavier Rudd as well. Zave was just starting to play music around then. It was, a bit transitional around those years, like his first stuff. But I was aware of him, more Ben Harper, etc., but still similar. And I had begun playing music. And 9+ years later, when the nodal opposition is happening, I'm living in a house of musicians, really exceptional ones actually, and just realizing like how far I've come with my relationship to music, but also how far I haven't come just because I don't have time to focus on it. It's never been my primary practice. I love it. I love playing it. I love trying to sing, but like it's a thing where music is a huge part of my life, and it's medicine for me. And so the story during that nodal opposition that gives you a semblance of what goes on in these biographical nodal stories is I'd been going through during that time the greatest heartache of my life. Like I've never felt like that, like truly like a giant had stomped on my heart. And it was very challenging to find my center. And the only thing that really did help in a healthy way of what I was reaching for back then was this album by Xavier Rudd called Kunyam Sun. And I listened to it like a practice every single day when I was feeling like that, because every song is kind of about the same process that I was going through. And just like the way he talks about moving on and woman dreaming is very profound, and love comes and goes, and it's amazing. And I've never had a relationship to an album like that in my life, where it literally felt like I was taking medicine every single day and it was helping my heart. And so as this process is going on, I move in with these friends of mine in Boulder, and I had no idea, but one of them, who you've heard on the show before, Beth Preston, used to tour with Zave. And I was like, wait, what? Like, that's amazing. Like, tell me stories. Like, I want to hear stories. Is he cool? Because I love his music. And not too long after that, it was actually in Gemini season. It was right around my birthday. And there could have been an eclipse happening around that time. I forget exactly, but the nodes were definitely flipped in Gemini Sag. He just appeared at the house one day. And it was hilarious how my friends did it too. They didn't warn me that he was coming, anything like that. Like just one day, get a knock on my door, being like, "Hey, come upstairs." I was like, "Okay." I go upstairs and like there's Zave, and I was like, "Wow, interesting." And what was so great about it, because like I really don't care so much about the meeting of famous people or anything, but it was an amazing opportunity to spend a few days around him and share some of these stories. And then he got to share these stories. And then we got to look at the transits and see how it worked. And just, like I wanted to give him a reading, but he wasn't open to having a reading at that point of his life. But like it was just amazing to story swap and see that like, oh wow, so like we're comparing notes, like we almost experienced the same thing. That's how you process it with the music. I want to be able to do that as well, whether it's with music or the storytelling, the show as I'm doing at the moment. But like in seeing how like at every point of the nodes being in Gemini Sag, because I have the nodes there, it was activating these like when I look back on my life, like those are huge moments, like me getting my first guitar, me learning how to play, me meeting one of my favorite musicians and getting to share such a pivotal story like that. And then coming to this next phase, like my second nodal return, and feeling the way that I'm feeling after the Peru retreat, after the Boneyard, now that it's dissolving, like there's a metamorphosis that is occurring. And it's just like a deepening, I think, as well to the stories, the plants and planets, and whatever that looks like. I'm not 100% sure, but it's happening. And I also teach this, I think this is a fun aside for Synastry, is that make a list of all of the people in your life that really inspire you. You don't need to know them. It's just like when you listen to them or you read them or you hear, just whatever. It could be your grandmama. Get their charts and see where their sun is in relationship to your north node. Oftentimes, their sun is right on your north node. Such is the case with two people that I've used in this show accidentally, right? This should be the Rahu show. But Martine Prechtel's sun is exactly on my north node. And then Zave's sun is a little bit off, but like they're both Geminis and their sun is in mid to late Gemini. And both of them, like the way Martine writes, the way he tells stories, it's phenomenal, like what he does with language. And I feel the same with Zave's music. Like there's something incredibly magical about what he does. And so I challenge all of you to do that activity and to connect this timeline again and to find the dragon eating its tail, to see what stories you are subscribed to and how you are indeed creating your reality. And so I guess speaking to the polarity of Gemini Sag, if you're a noob to astrology, it's important to understand these contrasting mutable energies, that there's something of the two that have so many questions and these curiosities that are always in an interplay of breaking the molds of all of our conditioning, especially religious conditioning and anything philosophical that gets in the way of the truth. Very much the Gemini Sag dynamic, and finding contact with the true spirit of an idea, the true spirit of a movement. Alchemically turning knowledge into wisdom is really the essence of it. So in an astrological sense, it's the difference between an astrological academic, Gemini, versus someone who is completely engaged with astrology and the magic of sharing it with others, a practicing astrologer. Right? Neither one is right or wrong. It's just the difference between Gemini and Sag. That Gemini exists mainly in the mind, in the theoretical, in the books. Whereas Sag is boots on the ground, engagement, in like seeing how this information plays out in the real world. And so there's incredible value then to experience, to travel, to testing these ideas out. And by gathering the stories, this is a Gemini and Sag thing to the max, we gather nourishment accidentally for people, because when we tell the stories, we don't know where they're going to land, especially these days with podcasting. who's listening, how it lands in them. Does it trigger them? Does it like fall in there, like just like into a nest and nestle in and really work on someone? We don't know, but the telling of our stories is an important thing because we get it off of our chest. We make it real by telling it. And then who knows how it's going to reverberate throughout the world. That's the point. And so we need to gather up good stories, which is the Sag component, and learn how to tell them. Gemini. Just some of the ideas of Gem Sag, and we'll talk much more about it because the eclipses are coming, and also Venus is going to go retrograde in Gemini come May, and I'm very excited about that. I'll do the Venus podcast when I'm living big in my tiny house. When I come back to Dartmoor, I have a plan of how I'm going to be living this summer, and I'm excited about it. Many podcasts will be in that space. And also, when the nodes move into Gemini Sag, I really think that too is the end of the boneyard, in my opinion. Like, yeah, it's still in proximity, but Jupiter and Saturn have to come together in Aquarius at the end of the year, but everything is like splitting apart right now. We could already say that it's kind of over, that we've bowed out, we've laid down the flowers and the libations and the tobacco, and we're getting ready to leave. We've learned our lessons, and now it's time to integrate and apply what it is that we've learned. And so hopefully we didn't build something on a dragon line or on water. Hopefully that Ketu in the chart contains many of our prayers and has helped to connect the song lines to the spirit world for us. And hopefully we're guided by them to the ancestors, that we're remembering something, that this dragon tail is also sliding out of Capricorn and towards the galactic center, late Sagittarius. My goodness, like that's one of the first places it's going to go. And this is a place that is a portal to the path of souls, the Duat or the Duat. I never know how to pronounce that version of the Egyptian afterlife, but it's along the Milky Way. Right? Many cultures knew that like one of the entry points of this was the galactic center. The Mayans talked about that, Xibalba and Hunabku, different words for it, I do believe. I'm not a Mayan expert here. Yet, it's around Orion's belt, in fact, the nebula, where when it's setting, that's a place where the soul shoots into the path of the souls, which is the Milky Way. And the galactic center, my God, it's involved with the Milky Way, but it's the center of our Milky Way galaxy. And there's a lot of visions to be had, or visitations from our ancestors within that place. And so it'll be curious to see what happens when Ketu just wraps its tail around that space. And I mean, I can report that when we did our final ceremony in Peru, it was when the moon was on the galactic center. And so, yeah, there's a lot of goodness within that little portal there that we can sensitize ourselves to. And so there will be, just one more show to complete this boneyard series. It'll be the 4th with Jupiter. I think I'm going to call it Weird Thunder. And hopefully, again, I'll get it out by the end of the month. But if I don't, it'll be in early March. And I'll be broadcasting straight from Boulder. I'm going to be spending a couple months there. And so don't go away yet. There's still a few exciting things that are about to happen. Well, all right. If you enjoyed that podcast, again, just scroll down on your podcast app, leave a weird story on there. Maybe that happened while listening or to another show. Take a screenshot of it, send it to me, and I'll link you to a class of your choosing from my website at holstoheavens.com. That's a free way. It supports the algorithm, and hey, it really does support the show. But if you want to take it further, if you want to get access to 40 other patron-only podcasts, maybe win a free reading with me every month, get access to the How to Get Started with Crypto video, get 50% off of a reading, go to patreon.com/Adam Summer. You can also get certified as a professional astrologer there at the higher tiers. And there's just an amazing community that is blooming around the material with the parlors and the classes like we're going to teach, or I'm going to teach, but we're going to gather this Sunday about Ketu and look at charts and go deeper into this material and really ground some of these ideas with each other and charts. And so I hope that you can join us for that. You don't need to be a patron to be a part of the class. It is available on my site, but patreon.com/AdamSummer is where you can go and support this podcast. This show is also brought to you by Solar Fire. So if you desire to track the old Wyrd stories in a better way, there's no program that compares to Solar Fire and being able to really edit your search, go after information that you're wanting to know, and then bam, it's right there. If you know how to use Solar Fire, which I have a 2-hour class teaching you how to do it, you're set. It's the greatest tool ever. So go to alabe.com, use promo code SOMA, and you get 15% off of Solar Fire. This podcast is also brought to you by Four Sigmatic. They are the mushroom company. If you want to contemplate these weird tales while sipping some medicinal mushrooms, well, they've got your back. So Four Sigmatic spelled out, and use SOMA as a promo code and you'll get 10% off any of their products. I have been, properly, I think addicted is the word, to their mushroom coffee. Not the little tea bags, but like the bigger bag of coffee that's just less caffeine. I drink it bulletproof way every day. I can't help it. I'm in a cycle. When it's wet and rainy every day of your life, you need a warm beverage. You need some Four Sigmatic medicinal coffee, I think. So go on over there, get yourself some. I think you'll enjoy it. And then, my site, holstoheavens.com. That's where you can sign up for readings and classes. We can do a Rahu Ketu journey. There's an eclipse journey on there. There's many different things that I offer that I would love to do with you. And for all of you in Colorado, I will be back for the springtime, like I just mentioned, so we could work in person. Or if you're in England in the summer, we can work in person as well. So that's holstoheavens.com. Right. So Rahu and Ketu, through another lens, could be seen as the rainbow serpent, I suppose. Breaking up conditioning, maybe seeing how we all create the rainbow in its body, that kind of dream time wisdom. It's always there. Just close your eyes and drift away. We must remember to learn from the ancestors. Don't forget. Don't feel shame or weight from your own past either. You're sculpted by it. You're beautiful because of your past. But even more beautiful when you are here with us in the moment and not too projected out there with Rahu in the future and caught in the webs of Ketu's past or other worlds. So don't worry. We don't know enough to worry. Not even the Gemini North Node that's coming up can consume enough information to make us worry. It's impossible. And so here's Xavier Rudd to bring us out with a final song called The Rainbow Serpent. Thank you again for listening to the podcast. Sorry I wasn't able to share the song. YouTube is a bit more strict than the podcast apps. So if you'd like to listen to the whole show, go over to Spotify, the podcast app, SoundCloud, or really wherever podcasts are found. This is Tree Theater. Ciao.